Welcome aboard the Shipshape podcast, your ultimate destination for marine wisdom and expertise. Our skilled crew, comprised of top boating journalists and experts, is committed to delivering informative and captivating content week after week. We're eager to connect with and learn from our fellow mariners, and we encourage you to share our podcast with your friends. Remember, word of mouth is our lifeblood, and if you enjoy an episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, you're helping us forge a robust community of mariners who can learn, collaborate, and exchange their experiences out on the water.
Today on the Shipshape podcast, we are speaking with John Berry, Director of Terminal Operations at Crowley. John brings a wealth of experience and insights from his impactful tenure at the Massachusetts Port Authority, also known as Massport. He has been instrumental in driving operational efficiencies and leveraging technologic innovations in both traditional and renewable energy sectors, specifically offshore wind. Today, we will look forward to exploring his in-depth knowledge and perspectives on terminal operations. Your two co-hosts today are Meryl Charette. I'm a live aboard on a Ta-Shing Toshiba 36 in Boston, Massachusetts, and T.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. This is Talha Bhatti. We have with us John Berry today, and we're going to learn about wind technology and amongst lots of other exciting marine stuff. So welcome to the show, John.
Thank you very much.
So where are you recording this episode from?
I'm actually recording this from my home office. I'm located in my home office in Londonderry, New Hampshire. Our office is located in Providence, Rhode Island.
So you've had quite a legacy within big marine business, but where did all of this start? Did you grow up on the water?
Interesting question. I originally came to maritime transportation, the maritime field, in an unlikely way. I was a relatively decent football player when I was in high school, and there was another gentleman that I was going to school with that was going to Mass Maritime in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts, and the coach of the football team wanted to talk to me about potentially coming to play football at Mass Maritime. We had a great conversation. At the time, I was actually going to enlist in the Marine Corps. And he convinced me to join the Massachusetts Maritime Academy, appealing to, my sort of internal discipline to get through that program down there. And it was a great opportunity. Interesting, as I was down at Mass Maritime, most of the people that are at Mass Maritime in Buzzards Bay are either from what they say the North Shore or the South Shore, referring to Boston. And one of the instructors asked me, "John, are you from the North Shore or the South Shore?" And I said, "I'm from the North Shore." And he said, "Whereabouts?" And I said, "Winchester, Massachusetts," which was my hometown. He said, "That's not on the shore." I said, "You've obviously never heard of the Mystic River." So it was a great opportunity. I am a big believer in how things have a way of working out. I had thought about doing a bunch of different things and really have put together a little over 30 years now in the maritime transportation space. I've been very blessed to have had, a very, very long seagoing career. In the past 18 years, been working, 19 years now working in the port space. So had the opportunity to learn a lot of new things and change as technology has changed.
So you've been doing this for a while, 1990s, right?
That's right.
So when you went to Mass Maritime, let's just talk a little bit about that. What was the curriculum like there? What did they teach you there? What did you learn
When I was going to Mass Maritime, there were only 2 areas of study that were offered at that time. And this is just after there was only one. There used to be only one, right? With sailing ships and everybody was on top, on deck. When I was going to Mass Maritime, there was marine transportation and there was marine engineering. I considered to go marine engineering because I have a lot of interest in the technical space and in engineering in general, but ultimately decided to go with the marine transportation, and incidentally was able to take advantage of the first year that Mass Maritime offered what they called a concentration in business at the time. And of course, Mass Maritime has really, again, changed with the times and really diversified their program of studies. And so there's I believe an international marine business major now, along with marine transportation and marine engineering as their core, subjects. But, I think that there's safety, there's facilities engineering, there's all kinds of emergency management, and now even master's programs being offered at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy. It's a great school, and I think, it's become a lot more popular. When I was going to the school, there was a pretty high attrition rate from just because of the discipline that's required to maintain your status there. So most people are going off to college to enjoy parties and mixers and all of those things. And at Mass Maritime, it wasn't exactly that environment.
And so you graduate from Mass Maritime, and then what?
Mass Maritime, I graduated, like I said, in 1990, and I went to work pretty much 2 days after I graduated. I had a few opportunities. Ended up starting with the Military Sealift Command, which at the time was headquartered in Bayonne, New Jersey, and it was really my first time being really away from home. So it was quite an experience, and joined the USNS Leroy Grumman, which was an oiler, and that was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, and spent a little over a year with the Military Sealift Command on that vessel. That was a lot of fun, and there were a few overseas trips with that. We ended up doing a little bit of time, what they called law enforcement operations, supporting drug interdiction with the U.S. Navy, and spent a lot of time in Panama. But, the pace was not exactly what I wanted to do. Or I actually talked to a few friends of mine. And at that time, once I came off that vessel, I took a job through the American Maritime Officers Union and actually worked on Crowley's big ships at that time. The ship I was steady on was the American Condor. The ship was in a East Coast U.S. and Northern Europe container and roll-off trade. But it was right after the Gulf War kicked off, and the vessel was taken into, again, a military
active
supply role. Yeah, exactly. And so spent a lot of time, servicing the war effort at that time, Gulf War. And then after the Gulf War, we were taking things back. So that was a great experience. Got to, was in Somalia right around the time.
I have to ask, did like school prepare you for any of these adventures?
I would say yes. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that I think that's really, and I talk to a lot of people that are coming into the industry, and one of the things I always remind them is that, trust your training. We talk about that a lot with respect to maritime activities. We do a lot of training. We do a lot of drills. We do a lot of studies, and I think that there's been many, many times where, I've had to kind of go back in my mind and think about, and I see, Meryl, in your background, you've got your books there. And of course, now everything's on the internet. But I think knowing where to find those answers when you're offshore or alone is really just as valuable as actually, having them in your memory bank. So, having those books, and that's the reason why, they're required publications that are kept on board vessels so that you can reference those things in a pinch.
Okay. So you were in Somalia. What happened then?
No, I was in a lot of places with with those Crowley ships and supporting. Again, it was a lot of government cargoes at that time, and took all of the equipment back from Saudi Arabia. Was in Somalia with those vessels.
How big are these vessels?
Oh, that vessel was just about 1,000 feet long. It was a small, yeah.
That's like being thrown in the deep end. Yeah.
Yeah. Big seagoing vessels. That was my background. For the most part, I spent a little time on some smaller vessels, but for the most part, I was on bigger ships and had the opportunity to travel all over the world, all over Africa and Europe and Asia as well. It never was in Australia, unfortunately, but, got to see a lot of interesting places and meet and interact with all sorts of different cultures, see different political systems. And it was a really great experience, I think, for my own personal growth.
Any pirates?
Of course. Yeah, pirates. Yeah. Yeah, we had a couple of experiences with pirates, nothing too serious. There was a vessel I was on in Lagos, Nigeria. It was near the end of my career at sea. and some pirates boarded the vessel. We were in Anchorage, and it turned into a little bit of a battle on board. No serious injuries, thank goodness. But it's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of, unfortunately, very desperate people in this world that we have to be on the lookout for.
Wow.
So you spent a ton of time at sea. Can you talk about just what that experience was? You mentioned that there was a ton of growth there. And then could you also kind of talk about how did you really balance life while being...
Yeah, no, it's a really valid point. I usually tell people that, I sailed for 14 years and tried to come ashore for 13 because, the reality is, and I really did enjoy the job, but, for myself personally, I had always wanted to be married and have children and, have a house and a farm and all those kinds of things. But unfortunately, that's really tough to balance when you're leaving your family for 3 months, sometimes longer periods of time. I really tip my hat to, the men and women that are serving in the merchant marines all over the world and really sort of given up a lot of their life to satisfy this world trade that we find ourselves in. For a lot of that time, again, I did think about trying to come ashore and looking for ways to transfer those experiences on the vessel to the shore. And interesting, I had a friend, he was in a property management company, and I applied for a job as some kind of a manager there. And at the time, I think he was the vice president of this company, and I just happened to be friendly with him. And he said, he was looking at my resume. He saw that I was recently serving as a chief mate. And he said, well, chief mate, tell me what that's about. I said, well, it's like being the vice president on the ship. So I figured he could relate to that. Unfortunately, I didn't get that job, but was very, very lucky to come on board and finally come on with the Massachusetts Port Authority. And that ended my sea career in 2003, really opened up my eyes to a whole new world of maritime transportation in a different aspect, from the shore side.
So tell us more about that, because I've been in Boston Harbor for years and years, and I've always seen these Massport big ships flying around. Tell us maybe a little bit about them, your role with them. You were with them for almost, 20 years?
18 years. Right. Yeah. So the Massachusetts Port Authority is a quasi-public agency in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and they basically monitor the ports and manage and operate the ports and the airport. I was more focused on the port side of it because of my background. And the Mass Port Authority has the Conley Container Terminal. They have the Black Falcon or the Flynn Cruise Port, Boston. And they also operate or own the Moran Terminal in Charlestown, Massachusetts. So they can act as a somewhat of a real estate leasing company. But at Conley Terminal, the container terminal in South Boston, which not a lot of people know about it, which is really, again, to my point, I think we were talking about offline, that it's difficult to get this information into the public just because of the security that's involved, but also a little bit of a nature of people in our business that aren't so apt to speak up and talk about what we're doing. So Conley Container Terminal, which is located at the end of South Boston in vicinity of Castle Island, I worked there for 14 years and started, really at the bottom, so to speak, on the pier, working with the men and women in the port, the longshoremen, loading, discharging containers there at the Massachusetts Port Authority. They actually own and operate Conley Container Terminal, which is pretty unique as far as port authorities are concerned. Was there when the 2 new cranes came from Oakland to Boston, and was actually there when the 3 new cranes came from China in the past few years. They just took 3 new cranes on, and was actually involved over there to some extent during the Berth 10 expansion. At that point, I had moved over to the cruise terminal, the Flynn Cruise Port.
So you mentioned you had to join at the bottom. Why didn't your past experience count? What does that mean?
You should ask them and let me know. No, I think it was interesting. Starting at the bottom might be a little bit of an overstatement. I did start in a supervisory position. The reality is that, and that's a hard thing for I think a lot of people that are working on board ship, making that transition from the ship to shore it's really difficult to step into a similar responsibility because there's just, again, not a lot of understanding exactly what that person has been through, what they've been working on when they're working offshore, because it's a little bit of a mystery. Saying that, I would say that anybody that I know that's worked offshore on a vessel, I certainly know what they've been through, having experienced it myself. And I think that those people, men and women that are working offshore, they really can probably do anything on the shore. But again, I do think that there's certain things that, you have to learn. There's a way of working on the beach, as we say, that doesn't necessarily, that's a little bit of a different component to working offshore. Offshore is a little bit of a different atmosphere.
Well, as you've mentioned, it's like there is this learning curve type deal. What tips would you give for someone that's thinking about trying to make such a transition?
The only tip I would say is really try to be courageous. That's one thing, I never thought of myself as courageous per se, although especially when I left the port in 2021 to join with Crowley and get involved in this new business, if you will, with offshore wind. Many people told me I was courageous, maybe not so eloquently. And, that struck me, and I really made me think a lot about, different things that I've done in my career to experience new things. And many times in our life, I think as human beings, we sort of crave comfort and we crave consistency. But I do think that taking a chance and trying to learn something new is the only real way that you can get growth. And I would say just believe in yourself and believe that everything's going to be all right.
Before we get into offshore wind and all of that, I can imagine that being part of Massport Authority for so long, there has to be some type of crazy stories that you can, maybe tell. You don't need to give too many details.
Yeah, let me think. I'm sure Massport would not be too thrilled at me telling crazy stories. I think that maybe it would even be a little bit more apropos to talk about the fact that the port itself is really integral to the supply chain in New England. And again, I know that the port really deserves more credit for, and when I talk about the port, I'll talk about the Port of Boston. And, we can separate the airport from that, even though Massport does control the airport. But I think that they would really want people to know that, again, those men and women that are working on the port, they're working nights, they're working weekends, they're working holidays, they're working all the time. The marine transportation industry is a 24/7, 365 business, and the vessels only make money when they're transiting between ports. That's that time when the vessel's in port, there has to be a very, very high production level in order to make the whole operation profitable. And contrary to what we've seen in recent history with respect to container operations, that's a cyclical business like all others. And there's times when things are going really, really well for the shippers. And then there's times where things are very, very tight, just like any other business. So high productivity and a very high safety record is some of the important things that I think, the public should know about the Port of Boston. But I do think that there's a lot of characters at the Port of Boston. And one story I could tell you is we were doing a special for Chronicle, which is a pretty local WCVB, I think, puts it on magazine. And there was a character of a longshoreman. And I was talking to Ted Reinstein, and, I saw the character coming up the way, and I was pretty friendly with him. I won't say his name to protect him, but he came rolling up on us, and he's a character in all true senses of the word, even when you see him. And I said to Ted as he was rolling up, I said, "Do you want to meet the oldest longshoreman in the Port of Boston?" Ted said yes. And he rolled up, and I stopped the gentleman and opened up the door, and I said, "Ted, say hello to, so-and-so." And Ted Reinstein said, "What's it like to be the oldest longshoreman in the Port of Boston?" And he said, "I make a lot of money." and it was kind of comical because he was really sort of saying it in sort of a bravado and maybe even a false bravado, but was pretty comical. And I can't say it in the way he said it because he is quite a raspy voice.
Yeah. So tell us a little more about Massport, though. So you joined as a supervisor, and then take us through some of the years. How'd you climb up that ladder?
Yeah. So, joined Massport in 2003, again, as a peer superintendent, peer supervisor. Really worked that job for quite some time. That job transitioned into other aspects of management, which really got involved with some of the yard management. And then ultimately, that job included liaison with the steamship line, doing all the planning for the vessel operations, and then actually being on the spot during the operation. So responding to anything that came up during the operation. I really enjoyed that job. That job, again, similar to working on the ship, was one that was a constant grind, if you will, but I did enjoy it, and I would have stayed there, but I had an opportunity to come into management at the Flint cruise port, and was offered the terminal manager's position there in 2017.
So what does a terminal manager do?
Terminal manager basically at that facility, of course, it depends on the facility, it depends on the terminal. At that facility, I was really the only manager to oversee the entire facility and the operation. So a small staff there that was on call during the day, but we had a big list of contractors that we would have to arrange for any sort of work that needed to be done at the facility. We supported the cruise ship operation there, which is really, the big activity at the Flint cruise port. We could support up to 3 vessels at any one time, and they're getting ready in the next 3 months here to come into their busy season in the fall. So you'll be able to see a lot of activity with cruise ships over at the Black Falcon Cruise Terminal. Yeah, it really sort of encompasses a lot of activities. And some of the other things that we did at that facility was to offer the space as an event space. And, I think when I was there, we had the opportunity to really expand that piece of the business. And it wasn't so much, again, from the standpoint of, I used to tell people we didn't have to sell it because it was right there on the water. It was beautiful. We really just had to make it happen. So there was a lot of logistics that were involved in making those things happen alongside operations and with respect to security considerations and so on and so forth. So it was probably true management in the best sense of the word, that you're managing crisis from moment to moment.
You have mentioned this at one point, but I definitely want to hear your take on it. How big of a port is Boston comparatively? And
you ask anybody from Boston, they'll tell you it's the biggest port in the world. The reality is Boston's actually a very small port. Boston at one time was the closest point, by Great Circle trading to Europe. So Boston in the early colonial days was a very, very busy port. The hub was Boston's name. The reality is Boston's a pretty small port as far as ports go. We were very, very lucky in the Port of Boston through a lot of the leadership at Massport and some of the local electeds and the business leaders to do that deepening project in Boston to keep us valid, so to speak, or in the game, if you will, of containers. And the cranes, also the bigger cranes, gave us the opportunity to compete in this new world of mega ships. And not that they're seeing the mega ships at Boston, but it's a trend in the industry to take advantage of economy of scale. Bigger vessels, same amount of crew, just better efficiency with more larger vessels. But, the fact of the matter is the infrastructure can't really support those vessels in many ports. So Boston's pretty lucky to still be relevant. And actually, I know they're very busy there at this moment with some new services that they've added very recently. I think that I think we talked about it offline, but collaboration is a new word in business now. And I think that one of the things that we're going to start to see with respect to ports in general, and really I think in business, is this idea of collaboration. So maybe the ports aren't competing against each other so much, but trying to support each other to add value back into the transportation system. So Boston's a small port, but it's critical to the New England market for sure. And I think that, it's great news that they were able to do some of the improvements there to really keep them in the game.
Ahoy, investors! Are you on the lookout for a unique opportunity to invest in a thriving industry? Set your sights on ShipShape, the innovative platform connecting boat and yacht owners with top-notch marine service providers. Our team is committed to revolutionizing the marine repair and refit market in North America. But we can't sail these seas alone. With your support, we can enhance our platform and create a significant impact in the industry. Don't let this exciting investment opportunity drift away. Contact us today to learn more about joining our voyage. Reach out to us at info@shipshape.pro.
So tell us more about the collaboration you mentioned. How would that work across ports? What does that mean?
I'm still trying to figure that out myself, but collaboration that I'm aware of is something along the lines of, trying to share best practices again and, experiences to refine processes so that we can, again, develop value-added services to end users. So this collaboration is an interesting thing because in a competitive market, we really want to try to protect all of our secrets, if you will. And of course, we want to do that with respect to business anyways. But I think that in a space that, we're probably going to find out what you're up to at some point anyways, why not share as much as we can to take advantage of, again, satisfying market to, again, try to find these areas to add value. And I think that that's one of the things that you're starting to see in all businesses because of the information that's available out there. And we start to hear these terms like big data. And, everybody is really having this opportunity to get all of this information, but it's really processing that information into real results is really the stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis.
Interesting.
Through collaboration.
Cool. And I really want to hear more about like the cruise ships. We haven't had anybody on the show tell us more about that.
Okay. Yeah. Cruise, it's a very, very, very interesting business. Cruising, has been around since sort of the beginning of time because, again, when we look back to vessels that were bringing immigrants, if you will, those were cruise vessels, if you want to call them that. But really, the cruise industry in the United States now is, again, taking advantage of this economy of scale. And you're seeing these vessels starting to go into these mega ships where you can see them on TV.
For sure.
Really,
there are water parks on top and everything now.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I mean, It's all around trying to... It's a great business model to get the passenger on board, offer them the food and the drink and the activity, entertainment, all in one place. And if you want to go ashore, you can work that through us too. It's a great business model that was doing excellent. I think since 1986, that business had been in a growth year over year for up until coronavirus. Coronavirus was a big problem for cruise ships and really strained that industry quite a bit. And again, as we all understand business, as much as everybody thinks companies have all kinds of extra money, the reality is that the company needs a return on every investment in a specific amount of time in order to make it viable. And so when ships were tied up with no activity, those bankers, they still wanted their money. So that was a challenge for the industry. But it does look like, and I was able to take part in the restart of cruising in 2021 in the Port of Boston. And I think that from what I'm hearing in the industry, it's starting to come back very, very strong. So it's a great business. It's a great industry. There's people that are very, very passionate about cruising. And again, back to this whole idea of the information, it's all out there on YouTube. There's several creators that are putting out channels on cruising that can tell you everything you need to know.
And so you're with Massport for 18 years, and then you shift towards offshore wind. Can you talk about what you were thinking with that transition? It's a hot industry to be in. What's the reality of it?
Well, the reality is I probably would still be at Massport if it wasn't for coronavirus. I've always been very sort of industrious. When the slowdown happened at the cruise port, that was my employ. It really got me looking around at different industries. And it just so happened I saw a job offering on LinkedIn for Crowley. And I had over the years looked at different things in business and was familiar with, the Cape Wind project, but I saw that, Crowley was getting involved in wind, and it really made me scratch my head a little bit. I applied for the job, just to find out more information about it. Well, one thing led to another, and I ended up coming on board. Again, I think at the time, my thought was I had been at the port for quite some time, and I really felt like I use this saying a lot with people. I say, give the kids a chance. I think, it's, again, we can always sort of do the same thing and maybe get the same result. But I do think I'm a big believer in making a change before you're forced to make a change. And I felt like I still had a little bit more to do in this industry, and really where I'm trying to head to now in this industry is in more of a business role and more of a strategic role. And so, I saw this as an opportunity to do that and get involved in a brand new business of offshore wind, and really didn't know anything about it, to be truthful. And I would say that the reality is most people in the offshore wind industry in the US, they're learning. It's a mature industry in Europe, but it's a brand new industry here in the United States. And of course, with respect to the Jones Act, with respect to the different unions that are active on the shore side, there's a lot of considerations that have to be managed. But it's really been interesting, and it opened my eyes up to so many more different areas of business. And like I say, that's my focus now, is to be more involved in the business piece of it.
So offshore wind, I mean, we're starting to see wind turbine farms all over the place. And obviously it's like, you got all this space, you might as well throw up some wind turbines. How is the industry expanding? You said it was mature in Europe, but what's the scaling up in the US look like?
It's been slow. And unfortunately, I think some of the recent press around it has not been so positive, especially here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and although I'm in New Hampshire today. But there is a project that's kicked off at the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal for Vineyard Wind 1, which is a 63 turbine installation that's going in offshore in the offshore of Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. And that project has begun, and there's a lot of eyes on that now, and there's been a couple of bumps in the road, if you will. But I think that the fact of the matter is that, and this is one of the reasons that I got attracted to this business in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in particular, but in general, we have to start to try to move away from a carbon-based energy system. And although there's certainly some trade-offs with respect to wind, and maybe wind isn't the every answer to our energy question, but it does give us some opportunities to reduce that carbon-based energy system. And that's really what kind of interested me. The governments are restricting new fossil fuel energy systems. This energy is going to have to come from some place. And especially here in the Northeast, there's a slow, steady wind source offshore, which is now, and again, back to this economy of scale, wind onshore in the United States generation for power is pretty mature. But again, it's just a totally different thing doing something on shore as opposed to doing something in a very dynamic offshore environment. And the other thing that happens offshore is again, economy of scale, the turbines onshore. When you see the turbines that you can see, like, for example, in Boston, nearby the Encore in Everett, in other places, those are probably like 3 megawatt machines. These machines that are going in off of for the Vineyard Wind project are 15 megawatt machines. So one machine is 1/5 of what these machines are. So it's actually really exciting. And the future is to have those turbines bigger. And that's the reason why, these improvements are needed to support this offshore wind industry, especially in the ports, but also with respect to the vessels, because it's a similar situation with respect to the container business. Again, trying to take advantage of economy of scale requires some infrastructure investment.
One of the things I got to ask, right, is you come from being a seafarer, right, which I can imagine had its own pack of salty dogs. And then you went to Massport, it's got its own characters. what is,
Well,
you
there's
know,
characters over here too.
yeah. I mean, what is the vibe like working kind of within, it's almost like a green environmental thing?
That's a great point. Certainly, it's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it. The reality is this is because of the industry being so nascent, there's a lot of younger people in this industry. There's a lot of excitement from younger people in this industry. I like it because I'm getting to be a little older, so they're keeping me on my toes and keeping me running around, which is great. It's really exciting. I think that there's a lot of positivity around this industry. But again, I think that one of the things, and now I've been associated with the offshore wind industry, it'll be 2 years here in September. It's time to start getting some results. And I think that this project starting up down in New Bedford is going to be very positive and, really work with a lot of those guys very closely, even though we're not really a part of that project. But really keeping, again, to the spirit of that collaboration, there's an understanding with respect to this business that in order for all of us to be successful, we're really trying to look to support each other with highest and best use of equipment, et cetera. So a lot of communication. And again, I think that this industry is really interesting because it touches so many aspects of our culture. The energy piece of it is very clear. But it's also, it's also back to ports and terminals. It's back to assets on the ship. The technology that you're starting to see with respect to motion compensation to increase weather window installations offshore has been exciting. Again, the community piece of it, that I'm pretty involved with respect to our project in Salem, Massachusetts, is exciting as well. And it's opened up my eyes to a lot of very real concerns with respect to what the impacts of these different operations are in communities and how we need to mitigate those the best we can. So it's really been exciting. And again, also the business. We're seeing a lot of public-private partnerships that are happening in this area of business. And I do think it's required just because of the expense of the infrastructure improvement. And I think it really is important to have that business that needs to get that ROI to keep pushing these efforts when things get difficult.
So I know a lot of our younger listeners will definitely be interested in something like this, but describe like your days nowadays. Like, do you get to go offshore to the sites? Like, what do you do now?
Well, it's pretty funny because when I was working for the port, they used to call me a vessel guy, even though I was working in the port. But now that I'm working with Crowley in the ports, they call me a terminal guy because I have a lot of terminal experience. So,
too funny.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun for me actually, because, when I was working at the port, if there was ever anything with respect to the vessel, oh, Johnny, get the expert over here. Johnny, what's this and what's that? And tell me about this on ships and this kind of thing. Whereas now it's different, and I do have a lot of exposure and certainly a lot of experience on board ship and do have a lot of understanding there, but we have a great team in the vessel. My colleague, Marcus von Spiegelfeld, who heads up our marine division for offshore wind, he's very, very capable to handle all of that offshore stuff. If they need me off there, I can go show them how to throw a bowline. But, for the most part, I'm focused on the shoreside operations and really around these projects for marshaling and operations and maintenance terminals.
Nice. And how do we get more young people into this? Like, what are some tips for the youth who do want to get more involved in wind stuff?
I would say that I know that Mass Maritime, there's some certain training that needs to happen around this space. It's a great question, by the way, because, that's another big concern of this industry is the workforce development piece of it, because it's a brand new industry. We're going to be looking for people to do all of these jobs. And that's one of the things that's exciting about it from the standpoint of a U.S. business, right? To bring some jobs here into the States and especially up in the Northeast in particular. So I would say that, it depends on what your interest is, but it runs the whole gamut from, boots on the ground to terminal operations to crane drivers to welders to fitters. And then you start to think about the project management piece of it. So, engineering and labor relations. Then you can look offshore and you can either focus on the vessel operation piece of it, which was my background, or you can be involved offshore with respect to the offshore installation, which is a lot of the same things onshore, from crane driving and so on and so forth. But I do think that there's other areas because of the way this business touches so many different things. We're developing a brand new supply chain. We're going to be developing all sorts of systems to monitor and capture all of this information so that we can use this information in a big data model. So it really runs the whole gamut. And I think that, keep your eyes open with respect to, LinkedIn, and also just get on board and follow these different companies, the developers, Avangrid, Equinor, Ørsted, South Coast. There's a bunch of them out there. Start searching their websites for opportunities. Get on the Crowley website. And then there's also in this industry a lot of activities with respect to networking. These offshore wind drink nights, these are great opportunities and that's the thing I would say that anybody in this business, one of the things that I just recently started to take advantage of was this whole idea of networking. And I think that it really is important to, put your name out there, ask questions. Don't be afraid to take a chance.
And throughout your career, you've become a leader. Could you give us some leadership advice that you've gleaned along the way?
Ooh, that's a good one, because that one brings me back to an earlier point, T, that you were making around Mass Maritime and, do I think about or, that training. Mass Maritime in particular is a real specialist, if you will, in trying to train folks to be leaders. Because again, it gets back to that whole idea they were training ship's officers, which sensibly are going to be leaders on the vessel. And one of the things that I really try to focus on with respect to leadership is this whole idea of leading by example. It's a tough one sometimes, because it's really easy to say you're going to be the first one there and you're going to be the last one to go home and you're going to let others go before you and you're going to handle all the hard stuff, so to speak. It's another thing to actually do it. So, I think being authentic is the best way that I can be a leader and have a high expectation of myself, first of all. And then, I do think that does trickle down to the team. And I would say that that's my go-to leadership is lead as if you would follow you. Act as a leader that you would like to follow.
Good advice. Nice. Okay. And I had a little bit of a question about just the sustainability of it all. I know we're talking green anyway, but then lots of people are like, oh, wind turbines, how they're going to get rid of them and they last forever. And what about that piece?
Well, I know that's it's a good one. You had to try to get me on one. I'll tell you, okay.
Just asking.
No, it's good. The valid question. One of the things with respect to the sustainability is, again, with respect to these turbines that are going to be installed offshore, there's a 25-year to 30-year life of those turbines. So those turbines with good maintenance can last 25 to 30 years. And then the idea would be to repurpose some of the equipment or actually retool to make the turbine maybe more efficient. Some parts would have to be replaced. So, I do think that that's a consideration that, we're still working on. Okay, what do we do with this equipment? How do we recycle it? How do we reuse it? And I know that that's going to lead to more business opportunities because there are going to be people that are going to be looking for ways to create value around that system as well.
One man's trash is a man's gold, right?
Yeah, we've been... Obviously, I've seen people working on how to handle destroying of used boats and the fiberglass.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to work on that. And one of the ideas is it's like, okay, you destroy the fiberglass, you grind it up. What other industry has issues with resources? The construction industry. Right. They need to sell the fiberglass shavings as filler for their products.
Yeah, no, I really do believe that's what we're going to see, as we've seen this throughout history, when we look at sailing vessels to coal-powered vessels to oil-powered vessels to now hydrogen-powered vessels, even nuclear-powered vessels. And now again, moving into electric powered vessels. Crowley's designing a electric powered tug that will be, zero emissions that they're going to use in the port of San Diego.
Very cool.
So how do you see the wind industry kind of developing over the next 10, 20, 30 years?
I see that this industry will start to take off when we start to see results from it. It's a big investment. And I think right now what you're seeing in this industry is a lot of activity and a lot of interest because of the potential. But the fact of the matter is, there's a huge barrier of entry. This very, very expensive stuff. Whether it's the turbines themselves, the investment in the infrastructure, the vessels, it's very, very expensive. So I do think that you'll start to see a lot of these companies that are involved start to drop out, and there will be a little bit less confusion, but more actual work. And as we start to see the benefits to our infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, as we see that cost of energy start to come down, because once it gets built out and now we can start to take advantage of it, I think we will see the cost of energy start to go down, and then the excitement will really start to take off, and there'll be more interest to really start to capture more of this activity. There's still a lot of technology that's coming on board into this space of offshore energy and renewables in general. And I think when I look offshore, and I spend a lot of time, going between two ports, 2 weeks, not seeing a piece of land, and to think that, 3/4 of the earth is covered by the sea. I think that there's a lot of opportunity offshore for exploration of renewable, of responsible energy development. I do think that we'll be seeing more of this in the future.
There's certainly a ton of different alternative green innovations, right? I mean, you got wind turbines, offshore wind, but I've also seen kind of the tidal turbines. What are your thoughts on that?
They're looking at tidal, they're looking at current, they're looking at using some of the offshore wind to use electrolysis to create hydrogen. All kinds of, sort of new technologies are starting to percolate out of this offshore industry. And again, most of the population is focused nearby the shores. It does make sense to try to take advantage of those to get the power to where it's needed.
And I see the picture in your background with like all those wind turbines. How does that affect boating, or is it just so far out that most people will never even see it?
It's going to affect boating similar to the way the oil rigs do down like in the Gulf of Mexico or other areas of the world where there's oil rigs. They'll likely have like vessel traffic systems that will navigate around or through these wind farms. Each one of those, this is a little bit of a conceptual, drawing, if you will, but there's about a mile between each turbine. And especially as these turbines get bigger, there'll be more space between the turbines. So, there's a lot of room to pass through.
And I mean, there was this one guy, he was talking to us, he was planning on investing at one point, and he was pretty heavy duty on the offshore wind industry. And he sent me over a document, and it was basically all the different things that have to go down in order for a wind turbine to come up. And it was like, and this has been mentioned already in the podcast at some point, but there's so many different factors and so many different components, right? Not only do you need the logistics, but you need the people on the ships, you need the people that know how to actually install it. You need the electrical guys. There's so many different components and aspects to it.
It's a huge industry, a huge undertaking. And like I say, the front end investment is staggering. Believe me, I'm seeing some of the price tags. I think that, again, it's a tough way to start an industry, it's exciting at the same time as well, because I like working on things that are very, very hard. I like working on things. I'm motivated by things that people say that you can't accomplish that. And it reminds me, and I'm old enough to remember when computers first came on board, and there was a lot of excitement in that industry, and there was a lot of innovation being driven through that competition between Microsoft and Apple and others in the beginning of that field. And you're seeing in our industry, people going from one company to the other, trying to keep talent. in these different areas. So it's exciting. And I think that there's a lot that has to happen in a very choreographed way that's very, very challenging and very hard to conceptualize. But then you also need those people that are there when something goes wrong to react to it and change and make the adjustment.
Nice. So as we are coming to the end of the show, John, any sort of tips, advice for people getting into maybe boating in general, but maybe specifically offshore, renewables?
I would say that the boating piece of it, the offshore piece of it, I don't think that you really, it's like I used to say when we had the cruise port and we'd have to bring somebody in to show the space. I don't have to sell it. All I got to do is open the door. I tell people that you'd be surprised how much commerce is created if you answer your phone and answer your emails. It really boils down to hard work. These things that make sense, they'll take care of themselves. You don't have to convince people of something that could literally hit them in the face, but you do have to kind of help them along. And that comes with the hard work piece of it. You have to kind of turn in the paper when the paper's due. You have to pick up the phone when the client calls, and you have to solve problems when they come up. I would say that it's fundamental stuff. I think that from the standpoint of getting involved, I would just say, jump right in. The water's fine.
Woo.
So, John, where can people find out about your company?
www.crowley.com. That's the website. That's our company website. It has a lot of information. If you want to learn more about our project that we're doing up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's www.salemoffshorewind.com. Got a lot of information there. And, again, feel free to email me with any questions. I'll be happy to point you in the right direction.
And I have to ask, in the beginning of the show, you'd mentioned one of your dreams to have a family and a farm and this and that. Did you get to realize that along the way? You seem like a busy man.
Well, my wife has a little farm out there, but no, I have the family. I've got the house, and I've been very, very blessed. I'm a very, very lucky man, but always looking to do a little more. Always looking to learn some new things. The farm, maybe when I retire.
Well, awesome having you on the show, John. Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure.
Check back every Tuesday for our latest episode, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to shipshape.pro.